I had another Nano Brows appointment and I wanted to walk you through what I do during the session and how I like to map out my strokes. So if you've seen my other videos, you know that I use the ink thread technique to map their eyebrows, and then I'm also using calipers to ensure that everything is symmetrical on both sides of their face. So the little lines that you see created on her forehead, I use Mad Love inked thread, and that at least for me, I've used many different inked threads, and I think that one creates the cleanest lines thus far. And then what I do, in some of my other videos, I use a Sharpie China marker, or I can't remember what they call it, but I call it a China marker. It's really sharp, and that's typically what I use to outline my brows. But for this Nano Brows appointment, she had previous microblading, and so I felt like it was gonna blend in a little bit too much, because it does look very similar. Because the tip is so fine, it'll look like her microbladed strokes on her face, and so I wanted to mark it out with something a little bolder. And I was also thinking of posting this video as an ad on Instagram, so I wanted to make sure that the outline was really bold. So what I'm using is a Sharpie pen, and it's just a regular red Sharpie pen. I think it's the ballpoint one, so a lot of ink comes out. So I usually map out the lines with this when I want the outline to look really bold for the client. And then you're gonna see me take out a gel pen, and it's a white gel pen, and that's what I'm going to use to draw in every single stroke that I'm going to want to go over with my machine. So now I'm using a micro Q-tip, and I just dip the tip in a little bit of water, and I'm refining the lines. When I say refining, I mean that I'm making them as thin as possible, so that when I show my client the mapped shape, she's not going to think that they're bolder than what they're truly going to be. If you have a really bold line that you use to outline the shape, what I found is it leaves a bigger room for error. So I'm staying within these border lines, right? These red lines that I created, and if they were thicker than on one side more than the other, then when you do the strokes, the entire shape is going to look thinner on one side than the other. So I always like the thinnest lines possible, and I tell all of my students this too. The thinner the better, because you also want your client to be able to approve of exactly the thickness that you are going to be putting on her face, whether that's with microblading, powder brows, or in this case Nano Brows. I want to make sure she knows exactly what she's getting. So I'm trying to make the lines as thin and crisp as possible. And I actually did her initial microblading maybe 2 years ago, and then she came in for an annual touch-up. And so now, because she has previous work that was implanted by me, I'm switching her over to Nano Brows, because she still wants the strokes to be visible. She does have an oilier skin type, and you can't tell in this video, but her pores are a little larger, which is right away a tell that she has oilier skin. And nano strokes, or nano brows, the strokes made with the machine, are meant to last longer on clients who have oilier skin. If you have a client with oilier skin and they're still wanting the microblading look, the hair stroke look, you want to be able to provide them with Nano Brows, because microblading on oilier skin, one, isn't going to last as long as the 1 to 3 years, and two, a lot of times those strokes are going to blur together. So then when touch-up time comes, everyone wants to have their brows touched up at that year mark. And for my oilier clients, I'll push them out further just so I can see more fading happen, and I'm able to then successfully implant strokes that when healed are still going to look like strokes. So then they go through that wonky phase when they're faded a ton. You can still kind of see a hue, but there's no more strokes. And for that reason, I wanted to master Nano Brows for these clients in particular. So now when I'm seeing a client for their initial session and I notice they have large pores and oilier skin, I'm only going to go in with Nano Brows or powder brows. A lot of times clients are really nervous about the idea of having a machine on their face, so you want to be able to explain to them the healed results look like microblading. The session just takes a lot longer, and this is a better technique for your skin type. That's the type of verbiage that I'm using with my clients. If you're curious about my setup, I have a camera that is hovering right above her face, and so I'm using a tripod that has a bendable end to it to where the camera connects, so it's like hovering right above her, right under the light that I like to use. Now you're seeing me go in with a white gel pen, and I am just marking every single stroke I want to do. One of our goals here is we also want to match the natural hair pattern. So if her hairs start going down sooner than they should, I want to make sure I'm mimicking that when I'm drawing in every single one of these hair strokes. If you go against the grain or you go against the natural hair pattern, then the healed results are going to look very unnatural, and the client is always going to try to brush their hair into the same pattern that you've implanted in their skin. So it's just, it frustrates the client. It doesn't look as natural. You just always want to try to match their natural growth pattern as closely as possible. In this case, on her right brow, she is missing quite a bit from the bottom, so I'm really just mimicking the top, and then I want to make sure that the bottom blends in well. So I'm looking at the other brow and that growth pattern, and I want to match it to this side so they look as similar as possible. Remember that we're always striving to have our eyebrows look like twins, even though they're sisters. So we want to get them as symmetrical and as similar as humanly possible, but know that every single face is asymmetrical. Every single person has one eyebrow that sits higher than the other, and we actually also have one eye that sits higher than the other. A lot of us don't notice it, and I do believe there's like some function on the camera that fixes this for us. We don't see it with the naked eye, but it is true. One eye is bigger than the other, and one eye sits higher than the other. So true symmetry is really difficult to achieve. But again, we're always striving for perfection. I just want to caution you with that, because I see a lot of newbies in the Facebook groups, and they're freaking out because in this photo that the client posted, one eyebrow looks higher than the other. And I mean, it's inevitable, but we do strive for perfection. The prep for nano brows is quite tedious, and out of all of the permanent makeup services that I offer, that includes eyeliner, lip blushing, powder brows, microblading, and nano brows, this is the prep that takes the longest, because we need to make sure that the eyebrows are symmetrical as possible, which in itself takes a long time. But then we also need to draw in all of our strokes beforehand, or our template that we are going to tattoo, and we need to make sure that all of the strokes are placed in a way that enhance their natural growth. So again, following that growth pattern, and then you show your client, and if they want to make any tweaks to the mapped eyebrows, we got to do this all over again. So I say that to say, if you're planning out how much time it takes for you to complete this session, for example, for microblading, for powder brows, the appointment slot on my calendar is 2 hours, and that gives me, I usually finish in like an hour to an hour and a half. That's with numbing, mapping, everything. Those sessions don't take long. That gives me enough time to disinfect after. That gives me enough time to prep before, prep my whole tray. That gives me enough time to chart. But for nano brows, the appointment slot is 4 hours. And I know that seems excessive, but it's really important that when you're working on every single hair stroke, you need to make sure that it is fully saturated, because then they're going to heal incorrectly. They're going to heal, and it's going to look patchy in those areas that you didn't take the time to saturate the strokes. And then I take extensive notes afterwards, but this session does take really long. I've been doing this for about, this technique in particular, the nano brows, for about 2 years, and it's still taking me quite long. So I mean, if I'm starting off with nano brows, I would do a model session and block out 4 hours, and then if you can finish before then, great. If not, plan accordingly, because what I've done a few times is someone has come in for a microblading touch-up, and they want to switch over to nano brows, which I offer at no additional charge. I'm still charging the touch-up pricing, but then I'm always panicking because I'm hoping that the next client is willing to wait, or I'm having to push the next client back. So learn from my mistakes, plan accordingly, and if you're going to do a nano brows touch-up, make sure that you are also blocking out the same amount of time for that appointment. I am using the Bishop, it's the Bishop PMU wand, and I am using the Vertex needles, the nano needles. I can't remember the diameter, but I got my needles off of Amazon, so it's the Vertex line, and I really like the nano needles from the Vertex line because it looks so similar to microbladed strokes. And you know, a lot of our clients are looking at our work and everyone's still looking for the microblading results and the looks, and so this mirrors that as close as you possibly can without actually doing microblading. So really a big fan of these needles. And then the Bishop PMU wand, I do have the 2 battery packs, and so I always have one charging, and I found that to be really important now that I'm doing nano brows, because it does take so long. And so, for example, after her I have a lip blushing appointment, so I already have the other battery pack charging. So once I'm done with her, I'm slapping that battery pack on the charger, and then we're swapping it out. I will say too, the wrap that I'm using on this machine, it's also made by Bishop, and I actually ordered directly from Bishop, and I love these wraps. It's no fuss, it covers the entire machine, so we're no longer using the wrap. I have another artist, and she really likes these wraps too. So we're not only, we're not using the wraps anymore at the tip because it covers the entire needle. Nothing gets into that plastic wrap, and then the part that you fold over has an adhesive. So you're literally just using the wrap. I love these wraps. I will make another video talking about my machine setup, but big fan of this machine. It's really quiet. I like it a lot, and it's smooth. And I haven't had any issues. Bishop actually sent me this machine to review, and I've been using it ever since. So love this machine, highly recommend the Bishop PMU wand and the Vertex needles, and get the Bishop machine wrap. If you're going to invest in this machine, buy the wraps. I think like 150 come in a package, and they're $20 something, well worth the investment. I also want to say, for the love of God, if you are not wrapping your machine, shame on you. You should stop practicing. The amount of TikToks I've seen with people who don't wrap their machine, you're just asking for contamination. You're asking for a bloodborne pathogen to be transferred to your next client. That's insanity to me. We should all be wearing gloves. We should be wrapping our machine. We should be disposing of our needles properly. And I use disposable everything. So please keep your clients safe. It's really important to wrap your machine fully. This machine is cordless, which I love because I feel like I would mess up if I had a cord hanging from my machine. But if you do have a machine with the cord, you also have to wrap the cord. There are special wraps for that. Please take the time to sanitize everything and to prep for your clients accordingly, because it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk of infection or contamination, or God forbid, a bloodborne pathogen, HIV, all the things. We need to keep our clients and ourselves safe. I also really like the Hanify pigments, and I ordered it's an organic line, so it's not a hybrid, but I can't remember the artist. I'll have to give him a shout out in another video, but I saw that he used this line, and I ordered, again, it's from the Hanify website, they're Hanify pigments, and a lot of artists I've seen have been using the hair stroke line, is what it's called, for their clients, for nano brows. So I switched over to them, and for her, I'm using a combination of the number 4, the number 3, and the corrector pigment. So 3 different pigments combined, and Hanify also makes their own corrector pigment, which I always add a few drops in if I'm using a darker brown. And for her, I want to cover her previous work, and her natural hair growth is darker than the highlight she has in her hair. I never look at their hair color when I'm trying to figure out what pigment combination to use for my clients. I am actually looking at their natural growth on their eyebrows. And so her natural growth on her eyebrows is a dark brown, but I did mix a bit of like a medium brown in there. And the corrector pigment is an orange pigment. So you look at the bottle, it looks like an orange pigment, but that's going to help you not heal ashy over time. So I'm typically using a 1-to-1 combination of a dark brown and the corrector pigment. So for her, off the top of my head, the combination was 2 drops of number 4, 3 drops of the number 3, and then 2 drops of the corrector pigment. And once I'm done with that pigment, or once the pigment is like halfway down in my pigment cup, I'll add 2 more drops of the corrector pigment and I'll mix it with a micro Q-tip. You need to make sure that you are mixing the pigment thoroughly, and I know a lot of people like to use those fancy pigment mixers, but for me, I'm like, that's one more thing to disinfect, that's one more thing to make sure is charged. And although I spend so much time prep and after my clients, I can't see myself remembering to charge a pigment mixer. So for now, I'm just using the micro Q-tip and I'm mixing the pigment inside the ring. So I quickly mix it and make sure everything is mixed thoroughly before I jump in for my session. For Nano Brows, my machine is set anywhere from like a 5.0 to 5.5. For everything else, I can comfortably work at a 6. But for Nano Brows, I like my setting low and I'm moving my hand really low. For Nano Brows as well, you need to stretch the skin really taut to make sure that you're, one, not going deeper than you need to. We're working very superficial, remember, and if you don't stretch the skin taut, you run the risk of going too deep, and then you're gonna get really ashy, healed results, and you're gonna get a blowout. So what that means is when the pigment, you go too deep and then the pigment bleeds out, so you're not gonna get those really crisp healed strokes that we all strive for. So make sure you're working superficially. The more saturation, the better. So I'm working really slowly on every stroke and I'm going back and forth. We need to have the thinnest lines possible. So what I've seen on a lot of people starting out, myself included, always start off with skins before you work on real skin. But what happens is you don't go over the same line when you're doing every pass, and then that stroke gets thicker and thicker and looks less realistic. So make sure you are practicing on skins before working on any type of clients. Wrap the machine and do everything the way you're going to do on your clients, because I promise you muscle memory is a thing. I mean, if you're, for example, if you're not wrapping your machine, you're working on skins, and then you wrap the machine and you start on your client, you're not gonna get used to how you have to grip the machine with the plastic on top. And I will say it's a little bit slippery, so if you need to do a wrap to gain that traction, do it. For me, this works, but I've practiced on so many skins, and I'm ordering skins off of Amazon. You don't have to order the most expensive ones. And I would say, like, put in hours of practicing. I maybe did like 50 eyebrows on skins, on the plastic skins that you get off of Amazon before I even touched a client. And that's that I was really comfortable with the machine. Nano Brows is a really advanced technique. It still makes me anxious when I'm doing it. My perfectionist comes out and I need everything to look perfect. So I will say it's a very advanced technique. So I've been practicing for years with my machine, super comfortable with a cordless machine, but I was still pretty anxious when I was working on my first models for Nano Brows. So make sure you are putting in the practice. Order, on Amazon you can find the really inexpensive pads that you can practice on. Use your machine, get comfortable making really fine lines and strokes. I apologize that the focus keeps going on the top of my head. I didn't realize this was happening when I was filming. I'm still learning how to use all of my equipment, so I hope that doesn't get in the way. I promise my videos will get better. I'm working really slowly, and I start from the tails and then move my way over to the very head of the brow. The reason I do this is because of my finger placement. As you see, when I'm moving towards the head of the brow, now I'm able to place my thumb on the tails to stretch her skin horizontally. So I'm able to put a ton of pressure on that and wipe away. Now I'm not afraid to wipe away the outline because I already have my strokes there. So let's say you started at the head of the brow and then you move to the tail. At some point you're gonna have to put your finger close to the tail. And what's happened to me is I've smeared the outline, and so then it's really difficult to stay within the shape that you've mapped out. So for me, it's been really easy to start with the tail and then move to the head, and I do the same on the other brow. So start with the tail, move to the head, work slowly, take your time. Again, this session is very time consuming and tedious, but the results are well worth it. I typically do one pass, and then I move on to the other brow, one pass on that brow. Then I use Ultra Duration. It's a clear numbing liquid. I use a disposable lip gloss applicator, wipe that over the brow, and it takes seconds to take effect. Now the skin is broken, so they're gonna be really numb when you do that secondary numbing. I do 2 passes on each brow, and then what we're doing is we're just going over the strokes that we've already done. So this is where it gets tricky, and you need to stay within the stroke you already did. If you go outside of that, it's gonna look like a really thick stroke. It's gonna look unnatural. This is where a bulk of my practice went when I was working on my skins initially. So again, 2 passes for sure, and then the third pass, I call it the perfecting pass. So that's when I will go in between strokes and add another stroke there, or if I feel like one of my strokes isn't saturated enough, I'll go over it again. But your third pass should just be the perfecting pass. You should have your full brows done both sides with 2 passes. I numbed her before in this video for 20 minutes because I knew I was going to record this, and I had enough time on my schedule to spend a lot of time numbing. But typically for my nano brows now is I'll do the outline, and then I'll dab the Ultra Duration over the outline, and then I let that sit for 5 minutes while I put the pigment in my pigment ring. I make sure my machine is wrapped properly, and then I'm charting too. Before I'm charting the pigment combination, the ratio I'm using, all my lot numbers, all of that good stuff. And while that's happening, the numbing is processing over the mapped strokes and everything that I've already marked up. So then I go in and I'm doing my first pass, and then when the numbing really takes effect is after you apply it over broken skin. So after you do the first pass, you clean it off, apply the numbing. That's when they're going to be really numb. So when you're going in for that second pass, you can truly saturate the way you need to. You can spend more time on a stroke, and I'm usually numbing initially and then after the first pass, and you truly don't need to numb again unless you're taking over 30 minutes in between numbing sessions. So these are the results after nano brows. So if you notice, it looks very similar to microblading, and these strokes look a little warm because of the corrector, but we want them to look a little bit warm because they are going to heal ashier than what you see here. So the warmth that you see is great. As you can see, it looks super natural. They look as symmetrical as I could possibly make them, and she was really pleased with her results. There's no redness, there's no swelling. She healed really nicely, so I'll make another video showing her healed results. But all in all, this took me about 2.5 hours. Let me know if you have any questions.